They called them monsters, savages, the scourge of the galaxy. Humans. From as far back as I could remember, every lesson, every story, and every warning was punctuated with the same unmistakable message: stay away from them. They don't care about us. They only live to conquer, to destroy. Our planet had been lucky, minimal contact, just rumors from distant outposts, but even rumors were enough to feed our fear. In our sophisticated cities, behind walls of shimmering technology, we had comforted ourselves with the idea that we were better. Our species thrived on intellect, on order. We didn't let emotions run wild like the humans did. It made them dangerous. That's what we were taught, over and over. They were dangerous because they didn't control their impulses, because they were ruled by aggression, because violence was in their very DNA. I never questioned it. How could I? Every piece of evidence supported that belief. The few encounters our kind had with humans had ended badly. Blood had been spilled. The few images that made their way to our planet showed towering human soldiers in primitive yet efficient armor, weapons blazing, taking out entire units of our people. We saw their cold eyes, heard their harsh voices barking orders as they advanced without mercy. To me, they were nothing more than living nightmares. But as much as I feared them, I was curious. Somewhere deep inside, I wanted to know why. Why were they like that? How could a race so similar in some ways to ours, with the capacity for technology, language, and exploration, be so savage at the core? My curiosity wasn't something I admitted openly. It was a dangerous thought. But it lingered. That curiosity took a back seat when I was assigned to my first deep space mission. We were sent to investigate strange disturbances on the edges of our territory. There had been whispers of attacks, ships disappearing, colonies going silent. But no one dared to say what we all feared: human involvement. It seemed impossible. This was far from any known human sector. Still, the possibility clung to the edges of every conversation. No one voiced it, but everyone thought it. The team I was assigned to was seasoned, far more experienced than I. They carried themselves with the kind of calm confidence that comes with years of fieldwork. I tried to emulate them, but inside my stomach churned. The idea that humans could be involved gnawed at me. My training was extensive, but there was no preparing for what I thought humans were capable of. We landed on the outskirts of an abandoned colony. The air was thick with unease, a silence that screamed louder than any alarm. The structures were still intact, but there was no sign of life. No bodies. No blood. Just nothing. We moved through the streets, the tension growing with every step. I kept close to the others, my eyes scanning every shadow, every corner. Then, one of our scouts returned. His face was pale, his voice shaking as he reported movement in the distance. I didn't need to hear it to know what it was. The human rumor had followed us here, too. The sighting report spread through our group like wildfire. Eyes widened, hands gripped weapons tighter, and the calm confidence that had marked our landing now vanished. Even the veterans, who had faced countless threats before, couldn't hide their unease. It was different when the enemy might be human. We all knew that. I didn't want to see them. I didn't want to confirm that everything I had been taught was true. But fate had other plans. As we moved deeper into the colony, I caught a glimpse of movement ahead. My heart pounded in my chest. It was them. It had to be. And then I saw him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his silhouette cutting a sharp figure against the ruins of the colony. He moved with purpose, not like the lumbering beasts I had imagined. He was methodical, scanning the area with quick, sharp movements, a weapon slung over his shoulder. Every part of me screamed to run, to hide, to do anything but stand there and watch. But I couldn't move. I was frozen in place. My first thought was that he was scouting for a larger group. Any moment, more humans would emerge, and we'd be overwhelmed. The stories had painted them as ruthless in battle. I braced myself for the inevitable carnage. But something was wrong. He wasn't attacking. He wasn't charging at us with reckless abandon like I'd been told they would. Instead, he seemed cautious. Almost calculating. He hadn't even drawn his weapon. A sense of confusion washed over me. This wasn't what I had expected. This wasn't the savage, mindless brutality I'd been warned about. And yet, the fear was still there, lodged deep in my chest. I knew better than to let my guard down. Humans were unpredictable, and that made them even more dangerous. He hadn't seen us yet, but it was only a matter of time. My team was preparing to engage, weapons raised, waiting for the command. But I hesitated. Something about this felt wrong. Attacking him, despite everything I had been taught, felt premature. But who was I to question protocol? The seconds dragged on, and I could feel the tension building, the anticipation of a fight we weren't sure we could win. My mind raced, trying to reconcile what I was seeing with what I had been told all my life. Was he just waiting for the right moment to strike? Was this some kind of human tactic, luring us into a false sense of security? But before I could answer those questions, the moment passed. He turned, his gaze falling directly on us. Time seemed to slow as his eyes locked onto mine. And for the first time, I saw something in those human eyes that I had never expected. It wasn't rage. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't even fear. It was curiosity. For a brief moment, I saw something that shattered every story, every lesson, every piece of propaganda I had ever been told. This wasn't the face of a bloodthirsty monster. This was something else. Something I couldn't quite understand yet. My team reacted as trained. Weapons were raised, but the human didn't flinch. He didn't run, didn't attack. He just stood there, watching us, as if he was trying to figure us out the same way I was trying to figure him out. And in that moment, I realized something that sent a chill down my spine. Maybe we weren't the only ones who had been lied to. The air felt thick, suffocating, as the unease within our group grew. It had been too quiet for too long. Something was coming, we all felt it. But what? No one dared to speak aloud the fear that had gripped us since the human had first appeared. Was he alone? Was this some kind of trap? Every one of us expected an attack at any moment, but none of us could have predicted how it would actually happen. We were making our way through the ruins cautiously, when the ground shook beneath our feet. A low rumble that quickly grew into a violent tremor, sending chunks of debris crashing down from the dilapidated structures around us. I barely had time to react before a massive explosion shattered the air, blinding white light tearing through the sky. Pirates. Not the humans, but something far worse. They descended with terrifying speed. Their ships hovered above us like ominous shadows, dropping down armed warriors, each more brutal than the last. These were the raiders we'd heard whispers about, violent, ruthless scavengers who took whatever they wanted, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. Panic set in. My group scrambled, trying to find cover, but the pirates were already upon us. Their weapons fired indiscriminately, cutting down anyone too slow to move. I felt a surge of terror unlike anything I'd known before. This wasn't a training exercise. This wasn't some abstract threat. This was real, and it was happening so fast. The screams of my comrades filled the air, mixing with the harsh sounds of gunfire and explosions. I ducked behind a fallen beam, heart pounding in my chest. My mind raced. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and completely unprepared for this kind of assault. There was no way we were getting out of this alive. And then I saw him. The human. He appeared out of nowhere, charging into the fray without hesitation. At first, I thought it was suicide. Why would he rush headlong into a battle like this? His kind was known for being aggressive, but this? This was madness. But as I watched, I realized there was something different about the way he fought. It wasn't reckless violence like I had expected. Every movement he made was precise, deliberate. He wasn't just attacking for the sake of it, he was protecting. He moved quickly, positioning himself between the pirates and my group, drawing their fire away from us. He was a shield, taking hits that were meant for us, and returning fire with deadly accuracy. My breath caught in my throat. This couldn't be happening. Humans didn't do this. They didn't risk their lives for others, especially not for a species they barely knew, a species that feared and despised them. And yet there he was, throwing himself into the fight with no concern for his own safety. In the chaos, a pirate spotted me hiding behind the beam. I barely had time to register the danger before he raised his weapon, aiming directly at me. My body froze, and I knew this was it. There was no escape. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. But the shot never came. Instead, I felt the impact of something heavy knocking me to the ground. When I opened my eyes, I saw the human standing over me, his armor scorched from a blast he had taken in my place. He had saved me. I couldn't process it. Why? Why would he do that? Before I could even think to ask, he was already moving again, taking out the pirate with swift efficiency. He didn't look back at me, didn't ask for thanks or recognition. It was as if saving me had been an instinct, something he hadn't even questioned. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Everything I had been taught about humans, all the stories and warnings, it was unraveling before my eyes. This wasn't the behavior of a bloodthirsty savage. This was something else entirely. The battle raged on around us, but I couldn't tear my gaze away from him. He fought with such intensity, but not the mindless fury I had expected. He wasn't killing for the sake of killing. He was protecting us, shielding us from the pirates who had come to tear us apart. At some point, I found myself following him, staying close behind as he cleared a path through the chaos. My legs moved on autopilot, my mind struggling to catch up with the reality unfolding before me. Every instinct screamed that I should be afraid of him, that he was dangerous, unpredictable. But I wasn't. Not anymore. We eventually made it to a temporary safe zone, a small clearing away from the heaviest fighting. The human finally stopped, catching his breath. He glanced back at me, and for the first time, our eyes met. In that brief moment, I saw something in his expression that caught me off guard. Compassion. It wasn't the hardened, violent gaze I had expected. His eyes were steady, concerned. He wasn't looking at me like an enemy. He was looking at me like someone who needed help. And I didn't understand it. None of this made sense. "Stay close," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. It was the first time I'd heard him speak, and the sound of it surprised me. I had expected something harsh, something fitting the image of the brutal human warrior. But his tone was calm, controlled. I nodded, still too stunned to form any coherent words. My mind was racing, trying to reconcile everything I had been taught with what I was witnessing. This human had just saved my life. Not because he had to, not because it benefited him in any way, but because he chose to. The pirates had been relentless, but with the human leading the charge, we eventually managed to repel them. The battle ended as quickly as it had begun, leaving behind a battered but breathing group of survivors. I found myself standing next to the human, both of us covered in dust and debris, the weight of the battle still settling in. He didn't say anything else, didn't offer an explanation for what he had done. He just gave me a nod, a silent acknowledgement that we had made it through together. I wanted to ask him why. Why he had risked his life for me, for us. But the words wouldn't come. I realized, in that moment, that this human had shattered everything I thought I knew. The stories of their brutality, their lack of compassion, it had all been a lie. This man, this soldier, wasn't a mindless killer. He was a protector. He had risked everything to save lives that weren't his own. As I stood there, watching him walk away, I knew one thing for certain: I would never see humans the same way again. As the dust of the battle settled, I found myself unable to look away from the human. Everything I thought I knew about his kind was crumbling, leaving me feeling disoriented, confused. I kept replaying the events in my mind, how he'd thrown himself into danger, how he'd protected me, a stranger, an alien. Why had he done it? There was no tactical advantage, no reason for him to risk his life. He could have left us to fend for ourselves, but he didn't. We had taken temporary shelter after the fight, and in that fragile silence, I finally worked up the courage to approach him. I was still wary, of course. Years of deeply ingrained fear didn't just vanish overnight, but my curiosity was overwhelming. He had broken every expectation I had, and I needed to understand why. As I stood near him, there was an awkward moment where either of us spoke. He was inspecting his weapon, making sure everything was still functioning after the chaos, his movements efficient but unhurried. There was no sign of the brutality I had been conditioned to expect. Instead, he seemed almost calm, as if the chaos of battle was just another part of his day. But that calmness was what allowed me to take the first step toward conversation. "Why?" I asked finally, the words slipping out before I could stop it. He looked up at me, brow furrowing slightly. "Why what? Why did you save me? You didn't have to. My people, we don't matter to yours. So why?" There was a long pause, and in that silence, I could see he was thinking, really considering my question. His answer, when it came, wasn't grand or heroic like I had imagined it might be. "Because you were in danger," he said simply, as if that explained everything. "But we're not the same," I pressed, unable to let it go. "We're different. My people, we were taught that humans only care about themselves. That you're violent, bloodthirsty. I've seen what your kind can do. You didn't even know us, and you still risked your life." He shrugged, still calm. "That's not how I see it. People are people. Doesn't matter what you look like or where you're from. If someone's in trouble, you help. That's just how it is." Stood there stunned. His answer was so simple, so straightforward, but it carried a weight that unsettled me. The way he said it, like it was the most obvious thing in the world, helping someone just because they needed help, was completely foreign to me. My people didn't act that way. Everything we did was calculated, logical. There was no room for emotional decisions, no room for the kind of impulsive compassion this human was displaying. "Your kind is strange," I said, not intending it as an insult but as an observation. He laughed, a sound that caught me off guard. "You're not the first to say that." I found myself sitting beside him, the weight of the day pressing down on me. There was a strange comfort in his presence now, something I never would have believed just hours earlier. I glanced at him again, trying to piece together the puzzle of who he was and what made humans so different. "We were taught that humans don't care about anything but conquest and survival," I said quietly. "Everything I've learned tells me that you're dangerous. But you don't seem like that." He sighed, his eyes drifting to the horizon. "Not all humans are the same. Yeah, we've done some bad things. But we're not all like that. Most of us just want to survive, same as you." "Survival," I echoed. "That's something I can understand. War changes people," he continued, his voice low. "It makes them harder. Sometimes it brings out the worst. But it can also bring out the best. You do things you never thought you could do. Sometimes you fight for yourself. Other times you fight for the person next to you." I couldn't wrap my mind around that. Where I came from, every decision was made for efficiency, for survival. Emotional decisions were seen as weak, dangerous. And yet, here was this human, talking about fighting for others, about choosing to help even when it wasn't logical or beneficial. "But that's dangerous," I said, more to myself than to him. "Caring about others like that. It could get you killed." "Maybe," he admitted. "But sometimes it's the right thing to do." There it was again, that strange human logic that defied everything I had been taught. Doing the right thing, even when it didn't make sense, even when it put you at risk. It was such an alien concept to me, yet here he was, living it. As the days went on, we faced more challenges. Supplies were running low, and the pirates were still out there, lurking, waiting for another opportunity to strike. My group struggled to maintain our defenses, but the human was always there, leading, helping, never hesitating to put himself in danger for the sake of others. He fought with a fierce determination, not for glory or personal gain, but because it was what needed to be done. I began to see things differently. Every time I watched him risk his life, every time he stepped in to protect someone else, I felt my beliefs shifting. The idea that humans were only violent, selfish creatures no longer fit with what I was seeing. This human was brave, yes, but he was also compassionate. He didn't act out of cold calculation, he acted out of empathy. And that was something my people didn't understand. One night, after a particularly harrowing encounter with the pirates, I found myself alone with him again. We were both exhausted, but there was something I needed to ask, something I hadn't been able to shake. "Do you ever wonder if you're doing the right thing?" I asked, my voice quiet in the stillness. He didn't answer right away, taking a moment to think. "All the time," he said finally. "But sometimes you just have to trust that your instincts are right." Trust. Another concept that felt foreign to me. In my world, trust was rare, something that had to be earned over years, not given freely. But this human, he trusted without hesitation. He trusted me, an alien, someone who had once feared and despised him. And more than that, he trusted his own moral compass, even when the path wasn't clear. As I lay awake that night, I realized something unsettling. I was beginning to trust him too. And that scared me. Because if I trusted him, if I believed in his goodness, then I had to question everything I had been taught. Everything my people believed about humans might be wrong. But was I ready to accept that? The more time I spent with him, the more I saw the truth. Humans weren't the monsters I had been led to believe. They were flawed, yes, but they were also capable of incredible compassion, of sacrifice, of love. And maybe, just maybe, that made them stronger than my people had ever realized. The moment of calm didn't last long. The air was thick with anticipation, a tension so palpable it made the smallest sound feel like a signal for something worse. I could sense it in the way he moved, how his gaze darted across the landscape, scanning for a threat he knew was coming. He always seemed to know when danger was near, long before any of us did. It was like a survival instinct hardwired into him, something that had kept him alive through countless battles. Then it hit us. The pirates had returned, but this time, they weren't just raiding, they were launching a full-scale assault. Explosions rocked the ground around us, shaking the fragile shelter we had been hiding in. Panic rippled through our group. We were out of options, out of resources. And this time, there was no easy way out. He didn't hesitate. He never did. As soon as the first shot was fired, he was already moving, already barking orders to those around him. There was no fear in his voice, no sign of doubt, just a calm determination that seemed to cut through the chaos. I found myself following his lead, my movements no longer driven by fear but by something else, trust. The attack was brutal. We were pinned down, outnumbered. The pirates had come prepared, determined to wipe us out this time. I could see the desperation in the faces of those around me, the hopelessness that came when you realized survival wasn't guaranteed. But even then, he didn't falter. I could see him in the middle of it all, moving with a kind of purpose I couldn't fully comprehend. He wasn't fighting for himself. He was fighting for us. At some point, I lost track of time. The battle blurred into a whirlwind of noise and violence. I stayed close to him, relying on his presence to anchor me, to keep me from spiraling into panic. It was strange. Just days ago, I would have feared being near him, would have seen him as more dangerous than the pirates attacking us. But now, I felt safer at his side than I did anywhere else. And then everything went wrong. We were cornered. A group of pirates had broken through our lines, cutting us off from the others. There were too many of them, and we didn't have enough firepower to hold them off. I could see the calculation in his eyes, the way his mind worked through the odds. He knew we weren't going to make it. Not unless someone did something drastic. That's when he made his move. Without warning, he charged forward, drawing the pirates' attention away from the rest of us. It was reckless, dangerous, and exactly what I had come to expect from him. He put himself in harm's way without a second thought, buying us the time we needed to regroup, to find cover. I shouted for him to stop, but my voice was lost in the chaos. He was already too far, already deep in the heart of the enemy lines. I watched, helpless, as he fought them off with a ferocity I hadn't seen before. But even as he fought, I could see the toll it was taking on him. He was exhausted, his movements slower, more strained. And still, he kept going. Time seemed to slow as I watched him. My mind raced, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just bravery, this was sacrifice. He wasn't going to make it out of this, and he knew it. But he did it anyway, because saving us meant more to him than saving himself. In that moment, everything changed. The last remnants of fear, of prejudice, of doubt vanished. All I could see was the truth. He wasn't the monster I had been taught to fear. He wasn't the ruthless, bloodthirsty creature I had imagined. He was a protector, someone who valued life, all life, even the lives of those who had once seen him as an enemy. He fell, eventually. The pirates overwhelmed him, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I thought that was it. That he was gone. But even as he went down, he kept fighting, kept holding them off long enough for us to escape. He had given everything. I couldn't leave him. Something inside me wouldn't let me. I ran to him, barely aware of the danger still around us, my focus entirely on getting him out. I wasn't going to let him die, not after everything he had done. Not after what he had shown me. By some miracle, we made it out. I don't know how, but we did. He was injured, barely conscious, but alive. I stayed by his side, patching him up as best I could with the limited resources we had left. And as I worked, I realized something that shook me to my core. I cared. I cared about this human in a way I never thought possible. He wasn't just an ally. He wasn't just someone who had saved my life. He was more than that. A friend, maybe? Or something even deeper, something I didn't yet have the words to describe. As he lay there, recovering from his wounds, I thought about everything that had happened. About how my entire perception of his kind had been shattered. Humanity wasn't perfect. They were flawed, like any other species. But they were also capable of incredible things: bravery, compassion, sacrifice. Things my own people had never fully understood. In the end, he saved us. Not just by fighting off the pirates, but by showing me the truth. By breaking through the walls of prejudice that had been built up around me since I was a child. And now, I couldn't go back. I couldn't return to my people and pretend that nothing had changed. I had seen too much. Learned too much. As I looked at him, lying there, bruised and battered but alive, I knew that my life would never be the same. I couldn't erase the things I had learned, the things I had come to understand. Humans were not the monsters we had made them out to be. They were something far more complex, far more extraordinary. And now, it was my turn to do something with that knowledge. I would return to my people, yes. But I would do so with a new mission. I would tell them what I had seen, what I had learned. I would challenge the beliefs that had been ingrained in us for so long. I didn't know if they would listen, if they would accept the truth. But I had to try. Because if there was one thing this human had taught me, it was that doing the right thing, even when it was hard, was always worth it. As I stood up, looking out at the horizon, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Not just for myself, but for my people, for the future. Maybe we could change. Maybe we could see humanity for what it truly was. And maybe, one day, we could learn to be a little more like them.